Walk into most Scandinavian homes and you'll notice something that doesn't quite add up. There's no visible pile of mail on the counter, no mountain of shoes at the door, no chair in the bedroom slowly disappearing under a pile of clothes that are technically clean but not quite put away. And it's not because someone just cleaned before you arrived. It's because the mess never really had a chance to build up in the first place. That distinction matters more than it sounds like it should. Most people think of tidiness as a cleaning problem. You get messy, then you clean, then you get messy again, in an endless cycle that never quite resolves. Scandinavian homes operate on a completely different logic. They're not better at cleaning, they're better at preventing the need for it. Today, 6 habits behind that, and by the end of this video you'll understand why a Scandinavian home rarely looks like it needs a deep clean, even though almost nobody there is doing one. Let's get into it. Habit number 1. Every single object has one specific home, and it always goes back there. This sounds almost too obvious to be useful, but it's the single most important principle behind Scandinavian tidiness, and it's worth sitting with for a moment, because most homes actually violate it constantly. In a typical household, a pair of scissors might live in 3 different places, depending on which room they were last used in. The remote control migrates between the couch cushions, the coffee table, and occasionally the kitchen counter. Keys end up wherever your hand happened to be when you walked through the door that day. In a Scandinavian home, every object has exactly one designated location, and that location doesn't change based on convenience in the moment. The scissors live in the second kitchen drawer, always. The remote lives in a small basket on the coffee table, always. This isn't about rigid discipline for its own sake. It's about removing the tiny daily decision of where something goes. Because that decision, repeated dozens of times a day across a household, is where clutter actually originates. Nobody decides to make a mess. Mess is just the accumulated result of hundreds of tiny moments where something got put down instead of put away. Because putting it away required a decision, and the decision got postponed. When every object has one home, there's no decision left to postpone. You're not choosing where to put the scissors. You already know. It takes the same 3 seconds either way, but one version keeps the room tidy and the other slowly doesn't. Habit number 2. Shoes come off at the door, every time, without exception. This is one of the most consistent habits across Scandinavian and broader Nordic households, and it's not primarily about cleanliness, although that's part of it. It's about drawing a hard line between outside and inside. The street, with its dirt, gravel, salt in winter, and whatever else has been walked through that day, stops at the entryway. It doesn't travel further into the home. Most Scandinavian entryways are designed specifically around this habit. A bench to sit on while removing shoes. A shoe rack or cabinet positioned right at the door, not somewhere else in the house. A small tray or mat for wet or muddy boots in winter. The entryway isn't decorative. It's functional, built, specifically to make the shoes-off transition fast and automatic, rather than an inconvenience people have to remember to do. The practical effect on the rest of the home is significant. Floors stay cleaner for longer, which means less frequent vacuuming and mopping. But there's a psychological effect too. Walking into a home in socks or bare feet feels different than walking in with shoes on. It signals, immediately, physically, that you've left the outside world at the door. That signal is part of why Scandinavian homes feel calmer the moment you step inside. The mess of the outdoors, literal and otherwise, doesn't come with you. Habit number 3. Nothing gets left on a surface for more than a day without being dealt with. This is the habit that prevents the slow creep most people know all too well. A single piece of mail left on the counter doesn't look like a problem, but that one piece of mail makes it slightly more acceptable to leave a second item next to it. And a third. Within 2 weeks, what started as one envelope has become a pile that requires an actual dedicated cleaning session to address, and by then the task feels big enough that it gets postponed further. In Scandinavian households, there's a strong cultural aversion to letting any surface function as a holding zone. If mail arrives, it gets opened, sorted, and either filed or thrown away within a day, not left to accumulate into a project. If a jacket gets draped over a chair, it either goes on a hook or into the wash within the same day, not left there as a semi-permanent fixture. This isn't about doing more work, it's about doing the same small amount of work immediately, when it takes 10 seconds, rather than later, when it's become a pile that takes 20 minutes. The mathematics of this are almost embarrassingly simple once you see them clearly. 10 seconds now, repeated daily, is less total effort than 20 minutes later, done occasionally under mild dread. But it doesn't feel that way in the moment, which is exactly why most households don't do it. The Scandinavian habit isn't a superior work ethic. It's a recognition that postponing small tasks doesn't make them smaller. It just makes them arrive all at once, later, as a bigger task wearing a more intimidating disguise. Habit number 4. The home gets a short daily reset, not an occasional deep clean. Most households operate on what could be called the deep clean model. Things accumulate over days or weeks. And then, usually on a weekend, there's a dedicated block of time, an hour or two, sometimes more, spent bringing the whole home back to a baseline. It works, but it also means the home spends most of its time somewhere between that baseline and its messiest point, gradually drifting further from clean as the week goes on. The Scandinavian approach is closer to a nightly reset than a weekly overhaul. 10 to 15 minutes before bed, spent putting things back in their designated homes, wiping down the kitchen counter, straightening the living room. It's small enough that it never feels like a chore in the way a weekend deep clean does. But because it happens every single day, the home never has the chance to drift very far from its baseline in the first place. There's no accumulation to catch up on, because nothing was ever allowed to accumulate. This connects directly to something we talked about in an earlier video, about resetting the kitchen specifically before the evening ends. This habit is that same principle applied to the entire home, not just one room. A home that's reset daily in small increments never needs the 2-hour Saturday cleaning session that most households treat as unavoidable. The unavoidable part isn't the cleaning. It's the accumulation that happens when cleaning gets postponed. Habit number 5. Storage is closed, not open, so mess disappears instead of accumulating visibly. There's a specific design principle behind Scandinavian interiors that plays a quiet but significant role in how tidy these homes feel. Open shelving looks beautiful in photographs, but it also means every object placed on it is visible all the time, which means any inconsistency, any slightly askew item, any object that doesn't quite belong, registers immediately to the eye. Closed storage, cabinets, drawers, cupboards with doors, hides that inconsistency. The room can be functionally a little bit disorganized inside the drawers and still look completely calm from the outside. This isn't about hiding mess dishonestly. It's about being intentional regarding what deserves visual space and what doesn't. A few carefully chosen items on open display because they're genuinely nice to look at or genuinely used daily. Everything else goes behind a door. The result is a home where the eye has very little to process when you walk into a room, which is a large part of why these spaces read as calm, even when, behind the cabinet doors, things are perfectly ordinary and imperfect, the way any lived-in home actually is. Habit number 6. Owning less means there's structurally less to manage in the first place. This is the habit underneath all the others, the one that makes the previous 5 easier to maintain rather than harder. A home with fewer objects has fewer decisions to make about where things go, fewer surfaces that can accumulate clutter, and less to reset each night. This connects directly to the principle of Lagom, just the right amount, and to duostadning, the Swedish decluttering tradition we covered in an earlier video. The math here is straightforward, even if it's rarely stated this plainly. Every object you own is something that will eventually need to be put away, cleaned, organized, or decided about. A home with half as many possessions has, roughly speaking, half as much daily maintenance required to keep it looking the way Astrid's does. This is why the 5 habits before this one work as well as they do in a Scandinavian home specifically. They're not fighting against a large volume of possessions. They're managing a deliberately smaller one, which makes every other habit on this list dramatically easier to sustain over years, not just for one motivated weekend. 6 habits. A place for everything. Shoes off at the door. Nothing left out overnight. A short daily reset instead of a long weekend one. Storage that hides the mess instead of displaying it. And fewer possessions overall, so there's simply less to manage. None of these are cleaning techniques. That's the whole point. A Scandinavian home doesn't get cleaned more often or more thoroughly than anywhere else. It just never gets the chance to become the kind of mess that requires a dedicated cleaning day to fix. Prevention, repeated daily, in small quiet actions nobody even notices themselves doing anymore. If even one of these is going to change how your home feels this week, hit the like button. Subscribe to Scandinavian Secrets for more of this every week. And drop a comment. Which of these 6 do you already do? And which one is new to you? I read every single one. Och som alltid, vi ses nästa gång.